Leon Festinger, a presentation by Andrew and Fareed. A brief introduction on Leon Festinger. Some of you may or may not be familiar with the name Leon Festinger. Either way, by the end of our presentation, Fareed and I are going to make sure that you know everything you need to know about him. Let's get started. Leon Festinger was one of the most influential social psychologists to date. In fact, he is ranked as the fifth most eminent psychologist of the 20th century, right behind names such as Piaget and Freud. Festinger was born on May 8, 1919 in Brooklyn, New York, to Russian Jewish immigrants Alex and Sarah Solomon Festinger. He attended Boys High School in Brooklyn and received his Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from the City College of New York in 1939. So, how did Festinger get into social psychology? Before I tell you about that, I'd like to refresh your memory on what exactly social psychology is. Social psychology is a scientific study of how people's thoughts, feelings, beliefs, intentions, and goals are constructed within a social context by the actual or imagined interactions with others. It is the branch of psychology that deals with social interactions, including their origins and their effect on the individual. Now back to how Festinger got into social psychology. Here's a picture of Kurt Lewin. Festinger became interested in some of the work that he had done, which is why he began his further education at the University of Iowa under the mentorship of Lewin in 1939. Unfortunately, by the time Festinger arrived in Iowa, Lewin had mostly changed his program of research to group dynamics in social psychology. At this time, Leon Festinger had not begun his career as a social psychologist and was not interested in Lewin's new work. Instead, Festinger chose to study some of Lewin's older ideas throughout graduate school. Ironically enough, Festinger, one of the most influential psychologists of our time, did not take a single social psychology class while he was studying at the University of Iowa. That's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? In 1945, Festinger then joined Lewin as an assistant professor at the newly established RCGD, Research Center for Group Dynamics, at MIT. It was at MIT that Festinger, in his own words, became, by fiat, a social psychologist. As a social psychologist, Festinger introduced many new theories to the field. However, his two most influential and impactful contributions include his theory of cognitive dissonance and his social comparison theory. Let's start with cognitive dissonance.
Before we get straight into cognitive dissonance, let's talk about two important terms when talking about cognitive dissonance: consonance and dissonance. Consonance is when there is an agreement or compatibility between thoughts, opinions, beliefs, or actions, and dissonance is the exact opposite. It's when there is a disagreement between thoughts, opinions, beliefs, or actions. Back to the main topic of cognitive dissonance. What does it mean? Let's break it down. According to the Oxford Dictionary, the word dissonance refers to the lack of harmony among musical notes. And according to Leon Festinger himself, he states in his article on cognitive dissonance that the cognitive in cognitive dissonance simply emphasizes that the theory deals with relations among items of information rather than musical notes. So what do these two words mean when they're put together? The term cognitive dissonance has been used by Leon Festinger to indicate the existence of incompatible beliefs or attitudes held simultaneously by a human being. It's the mental discomfort that occurs whenever an individual holds any two conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes. For example, a smoker smokes for years, but after recent events, he's convinced that smoking carries the hazard of lung cancer. This is an example where an individual has conflicting values and those conflicting ideas, and as a result, a great deal of dissonance occurs. The individual avidly smokes, but also knows that it carries a great risk of lung cancer. What would this individual who enjoys smoking do? Festinger says that individuals encountering cognitive dissonance will either change their behavior or cognition, or suppress or ignore the dissonance, or do something in between to get rid of it. Cognitive dissonance centers around the idea that if a person knows various things that are not psychologically consistent with one another, he will in a variety of ways try to make them more consistent. In some ways, cognitive dissonance serves as a form of motivation to the brain, motivating people to change their behaviors or opinions. In an experiment in 1962 during Festinger's time at Stanford University, Festinger and a colleague of his, James M. Carl Smith, witnessed the effect that cognitive dissonance had on people for themselves. Basically, in the experiment, college students volunteered to take part in a mock experiment, which to their knowledge they didn't know was a mock experiment. The experiment was purposely made to be an unnecessarily long, boring, and fatiguing lesson so that everyone taking part would have an identical experience, one which was unfavorable. Subjects after the experiment were then persuaded into lying and paid varying amounts to do so. Some were paid $20 while others were paid merely a single dollar to lie about their experience to the next person in line to take part in the experiment, saying things such as, "It was very interesting and lots of fun."
Each subject's assignment to turn each of the wooden pegs a quarter turn to the right, then to start over and turn them again and again and again until the experimenter tells him to stop. It is the most boring and fatiguing task we could devise. Our purpose was to provide each subject with the same dull job so each would have a similar negative experience. In order to obtain the scientific data we need, we use a little subterfuge and say we're studying motor performance. Afterward, they will be told the truth.
Okay, that's fine. Let me tell you now what we're actually studying here. It's the effect of preparatory mental set on performance. Half of the subjects are doing the job cold, just as you did. The rest of the subjects are prepared by being told that the experiment will be very interesting and enjoyable. In fact, lots of fun. Now I have a somewhat unusual request to make of you. The next subject is waiting right outside, but the fellow who ordinarily gives the spiel isn't here. I wonder if you could possibly take his place. As a matter of fact, we figure we'll be needing someone in the future, so I'd like to offer you a $20 retainer and have you remain on call for us. Would that be all right?
$20? That'd be fine.
We'd like to give you $1 as a sort of a retainer and have you remain on call with us. Would that be all right with you?
Yes, that'll be all right.
So we'd like to offer you a retainer of $20.
We divide the group. Half will get $20 to tell someone the dull task is interesting. The other half get $1 for the same job. They all agree to tell an obvious lie.
Okay, thank you very much. The next subject is waiting right outside.
In reality, the subject meets one of our assistants, trained to get them to publicly commit themselves to this untruth.
Good. They gave us some pegs to turn, and well, I turned them for a while, and it was a lot of fun. It was sort of interesting, I guess.
Really? Well, that's strange, because a friend of mine took the experiment last week. I think it was the same experiment, and he said it was pretty miserable, and that I should do everything I could to get out of it.
Well, I think maybe your friend was wrong. Perhaps it was a different experiment, because this was a lot of fun. It appeared to me as if it were a puzzle. We, had to turn these knobs, and I tried to figure out what we were doing it for, but I really couldn't figure it out. Perhaps you'll have better luck.
Well, what do you have to do exactly? Well, we turned pegs and knobs the same way each time, and that's about what it was, but it was very interesting. Do you try to find
Notice,
a solution of any kind?
the $1 subject sells just as hard as the $20 one. But which of them will come to believe what they are saying? Other theories might predict that the man who is paid most would have the highest motivation for enthusing over the dull task and would be most sold on it himself. Cognitive dissonance theory leads to an exactly opposite prediction. The man who is paid $20 knows that the task is dull, but he also knows that he had sufficient justification for saying that it wasn't. How much did you learn from this experiment?
Learn? Well, I don't think I learned too much from the experiment.
Did you enjoy working on the manual task?
Well, it really wasn't too enjoyable. In fact, it was rather boring.
How about the man who is paid $1? He knows the task is dull, but he has two discrepant thoughts. He also knows that he did not have sufficient justification for saying that it wasn't. For him, there is dissonance. Time after time, we have seen what follows. He reduces the dissonance by changing his opinion about the dullness of the task. Tell me, how much did you learn from this experiment?
Well, at first I don't think I was learning it too much, but when I got into it, I think it was quite interesting, and After a while, it got better.
Did you enjoy working on the manual test?
Yes, I enjoyed it.
Would you like to participate in such an experiment again?
Yes, I think I would like to.
Just as hunger impels a person to eat, so does dissonance impel a person to change his opinions or his behavior. A quote by Leon Festinger. Festinger and Collinsmith found that those who were paid $20 took the money, lied, and kept their personal opinion on the experiment being dull and boring consistent, while those who were paid $1 took the money, lied, felt dissonance, and as a byproduct changed their own personal beliefs to line up with their previously stated fib. But why is that, you may ask? It comes down to something that Festinger liked to call dissonance reduction. Dissonance reduction is when a person reduces the uncomfortable psychological inconsistency among elements of a cognitive system. Since some subjects were paid $20 to do a fairly easy and simple task for a great payout, those subjects felt justified for their actions. They felt that their lying was justified. But those who were paid $1 to lie didn't feel as if their pay justified their action, and now they feel as if what they said about the experiment being fun and interesting doesn't line up with their own personal beliefs, to the experiment being unnecessarily long and boring. This causes dissonance. So what does the individual do to reduce their dissonance? Since they can't take back what they said, the best they can do is change their personal beliefs to match up with their irrevocable lie, and that's exactly what they do. This is an example of dissonance reduction. In this experiment where people make irrevocable statements that are lies, we would expect the greatest change in private opinion among the subjects given the least tangible incentive for changing, as people with the least incentive for unreasonable actions generally have the most dissonance, and therefore have the greatest reason to reduce their dissonance.
Now let's talk about social comparison theory. Social comparison is the process in which people come to know themselves by evaluating their own abilities, attitudes, and beliefs in a comparison with others. It states that people have a fundamental desire to evaluate their opinions and abilities, and that they strive to have stable, accurate appraisals of themselves. How does social comparison work? To use social comparison to get a proper evaluation of your skills, you would compare yourself to people that are roughly on the same level. This would be the most accurate way of judging your skills. However, we often resort to upward or downward social comparisons. When using upward comparisons, which means that you are comparing your skills to someone that is better than you, this can help motivate you to change or improve the skills that you lack. At the same time, upward comparison can also make you feel insecure if you already lack confidence, and it may cause you to see more flaws in yourself. On the other hand, using downward comparisons, you would compare yourself to someone that is worse than you. This would be a way of making you feel better about your skill level. This could be quite beneficial to your ego. In conclusion, if you're in a bad position and would like to feel better, looking downwards at the people that are worse than you might be the way to go. But if you're in a good position and would like to improve, you may want to look upwards. Here is a video clip to help you better understand downward comparison. She boosted her self-esteem by making herself feel superior to the other character. She does this by looking downwards. This allows her to evaluate herself at a higher ranking. And now, a clip to help you better understand upward comparison.
I don't know what else I can do, because if I do something right, it's unacknowledged. She doesn't even say thank you. But if I do something wrong, she is vicious.
Don't you know that you were working at the place that published some of the greatest artists of the century? Halston, Lagerfeld, De La Renta. And what they did, what they created, was greater than art. Because you live your life in it.
Okay, so I'm screwing it up.
By comparing herself against other talented artists, she who originally felt underpraised then actually realized she wasn't doing too well. By using upward comparison, she was able to get a better understanding of where she stands. I hope that those video clips were able to help you better understand the social comparison theory, because the social comparison theory was highly impactful to psychology, partially because it contributed to our understanding of the communication process. Time for our inquiry questions. Feel free to pause the video and discuss amongst yourselves.